You thought forgiveness would fix it, that it would show maturity, that it would prove how deep your love was, how stable your mind was, how secure your manhood was. You thought that if you took her back, softened your tone, explained your position calmly, gave her another chance, she'd see you differently, respect you more, realize your worth. But what happened? She grew colder. She pulled away. She started arguing more, showing less effort, withdrawing her softness. The more you forgave, the less she cared, and now you're left in confusion, thinking maybe it was your fault, that maybe you were too harsh, too demanding, too complicated to love. But no, you weren't too hard. You were too soft. And softness without condition does not breed intimacy. It breeds indifference. Machiavelli understood this centuries ago. In politics, as in love, mercy must be measured. Forgiveness must be strategic. A prince who pardons every betrayal invites more of them. He sends a signal that treason has no teeth. That loyalty is optional. That strength is performative. And the same law applies in your relationships. When you forgave her, not because she earned it, not because she changed, not because justice had been served, but because you hoped it would bring her closer, you inverted the power dynamic. You made her the authority. You gave her the throne. And once she saw that her worst could be accepted without cost, she had no reason to offer her best. You didn't forgive her out of strength. You forgave her out of fear, the fear of losing her, the fear of being alone, the fear of confrontation, the fear that standing firm would end the relationship. And so, to avoid collapse, you collapsed first. But understand this. A man who forgives without correction is not noble. He is naive. And naivety, when mistaken for virtue, always ends in ruin. She did something that violated your standard. She lied. She disrespected you. She flirted with disrespect and watched how you'd react. She withdrew intimacy and waited to see if you'd chase. She tested your edge, and instead of meeting steel, she found softness. And instead of stepping back into order, she saw an opportunity. Not because she's cruel, but because she's human. And humans do not respect what tolerates being stepped on. You thought forgiveness would de-escalate the problem. But instead, it trained her. It taught her that emotion overrules order, that your peace mattered less than her presence, that she could violate the structure and be welcomed back with softness. You didn't teach her to love you. You taught her to manage you, to pull away when challenged, to manipulate when confronted, to cry when cornered. And worst of all, you taught her that consequence was negotiable. This is why you feel the shift, why she doesn't look at you the same, why her words feel flat, why her eyes look past you now. It wasn't one moment. It was the pattern, the repeated decision to prioritize harmony over hierarchy, to forgive before assessing, to explain instead of enforcing. You didn't lead, you adjusted. And the woman who once saw you as her anchor now sees you as her audience. So hear this. Forgiveness is not the enemy, but forgiveness without consequence is. Forgiveness that costs you respect is not virtue. It's surrender. And the man who surrenders his standards to preserve a connection will always lose both. You thought it would fix things. But in her mind, it confirmed one thing. You will not protect your throne. You keep thinking she left because you weren't good enough, because you didn't love her the right way, because you didn't say the perfect words at the perfect time. But I'm telling you this now. She didn't leave because you were bad. She left because you were easy to read, easy to move, easy to manage. You made your standards bendable, your forgiveness automatic, your discipline conditional on her emotions. And when a woman senses that your law can be rewritten through affection, through crying, through withdrawal, she doesn't fall deeper in love. She recalculates, not emotionally, strategically. At first, your patience impressed her. Your empathy made her feel safe. Your ability to work things through felt rare. But what began as admiration slowly decayed into contempt. Because what she first saw as strength, your calm, your openness, your forgiveness, she soon realized was performance. And when she tested it, when she violated your principles just to see what would happen, she found no steel, no silence, no removal, only reaction, only effort, only your desperate attempt to bring her back into alignment without asking what the violation cost you. This is what most men never understand. The loss of respect doesn't happen during arguments. It happens in the moments you let slide. It happens in the disrespect you laughed off, in the betrayal you justified, in the tone you ignored, in the apology you gave too fast. Every time you accepted less than what you deserved without consequence, you told her, "I don't need to be respected, just don't leave me." And once she knows that, she doesn't fear disappointing you. She fears nothing, because your presence has become a constant, and what is constant without cost is never admired. It's managed. You thought love meant tolerance, but love without enforcement is not connection, it's erosion. Machiavelli warned that a prince must never allow himself to be mocked, even by those closest to him, because when mockery is tolerated, authority dissolves. And in relationships, mockery doesn't always look like laughter. It looks like emotional withdrawal, passive-aggressive tone, coldness without explanation, indifference to your boundaries, testing your reactions just to confirm that your fire is for display, not for defense. She didn't leave because you weren't romantic. She didn't leave because you weren't enough. She left because you forgave her too much. And forgiveness, without requirement, without repair, without earned repentance, turns love into submission. It tells her, "Your comfort matters more than my order." And no woman stays in that dynamic. Not because she wants to leave, but because you trained her to no longer value you. You weren't too harsh. You were too accessible. You weren't too complicated. You were too transparent. And when the storms came, when the tests arrived, when she wanted to know whether you were a man or a servant, you smiled, you gave, you stayed. And in doing so, you gave her the answer. You would rather keep the peace than enforce your power. So understand this. She didn't walk away from cruelty. She walked away from softness. Softness that came too easily. Forgiveness that cost her nothing. Patience that never demanded growth. She didn't leave because of what you lacked. She left because she never had to earn what you gave. Every time she crossed the line and you let it slide, you weren't keeping the peace. You were teaching her a lesson she learned faster than you realized. And it was this. Disrespect has no cost. You didn't enforce your standard, you explained it. You didn't correct her behavior, you empathized with it. You didn't walk when your boundary was broken, you stayed, hoping your patience would teach her your value. But all it taught her was your weakness. Because a woman doesn't watch what you say you'll tolerate. She watches what you silently allow and builds her strategy from there. The tone she used, the time she withheld, the way she questioned your decisions, the jokes she made about your seriousness. You told yourself it wasn't that bad. You rationalized. You thought being secure meant not reacting. But Machiavelli knew better. He said, "He who allows himself to be deceived is already halfway conquered," and you allowed it. You allowed her to push. You allowed her to test. You allowed her to see how far she could go before you'd pull away. And she discovered, to her disappointment, that there was no such distance. You were always there, still texting, still apologizing, still trying to restore harmony after she was the one who disrupted it. She didn't lose respect for you suddenly. She lost it predictably because you gave her no reason to maintain it. Your forgiveness, your softness, your endless understanding. It became the evidence that her misbehavior had no real consequence. And when there is no cost for chaos, chaos becomes the culture. It becomes the rhythm. It becomes the new normal. Until your standards are no longer standards, they're wishes. And wishes, when not enforced, make you look like a man who talks but cannot act, who preaches strength but practices submission. Every time she came back after crossing your line and you received her with open arms, she didn't feel safe. She felt in charge. You told yourself you were leading with compassion. But she wasn't feeling love. She was feeling control, not hers. Yours, lost. The structure you once presented, the man she initially respected, had faded, replaced by someone who smiled more than he enforced, who feared losing her more than he feared losing himself. And once she saw that, the game changed. Disrespect isn't always loud. Sometimes it's in the pause, the delayed reply, the tone shift, the moment she stops asking for your opinion, the way she now makes plans without you. The subtle withdrawal of admiration. That is the cost of letting disrespect go unanswered. You didn't stop her from crossing the line. So she built a house on the other side and expected you to live in it. Machiavelli warned rulers that unchecked betrayal becomes ritual. If you don't cut it off, if you don't make an example, it multiplies. And the same is true with women. Forgive without correction, and you invite the behavior again. Let it pass once, and it becomes her leverage. She'll test you again, and again. And every time you react with softness, she will adjust her calculation. This man does not hold the line. This man fears conflict. This man can be moved. So now you know. If she lost respect for you, it wasn't random, it was learned. You taught her, gently, patiently, lovingly, that disrespect has no cost, and she believed you. An apology is not a strategy. It's a concession. And if you're forced to make it, you do it once, sharply, clearly, and from above. But you apologized like it was your job. You apologized to keep her close, to buy time, to de-escalate. And the more you said sorry, the less she heard the word, and the more she saw the frame behind it collapsing. Because power doesn't apologize twice. Power apologizes once, for optics, and then makes adjustments through behavior, through silence, through distance. But a man who keeps apologizing without restructuring himself doesn't look strong. He looks afraid. And no one respects fear that tries to wear love like armor. Machiavelli warned that mercy without force becomes surrender, and an apology when repeated too often becomes mercy without structure. You thought it would earn trust. You thought it would restore connection. But every time you apologized after she crossed you, after she disrespected you, after she made you chase her, you weren't taking responsibility. You were taking the blame. You were putting your crown in her hands and begging her to place it back on your head. And she may have smiled. She may have hugged you. But in her mind, the throne was already hers. An apology means nothing without enforcement. And a second apology? That's proof you never meant the first. You thought you were being humble, being honest, being emotionally evolved. But the man who constantly apologizes becomes predictable, and predictable men can be gamed. A woman starts to test you, not because she hates you, but because she wants to see if you'll ever hold the line. And when you don't, when you keep softening after every infraction, she stops testing. Not because she trusts you now, but because she knows she's in charge. Think back. You apologized after she stonewalled you, after she flirted with disrespect, after she emotionally withdrew, and every time you gave her another verbal offering hoping it would buy peace, all you taught her was this: I can misbehave and he will still bend. He will still reach. He will still explain. He fears losing me more than I fear disappointing him. That dynamic is fatal, because once your words are detached from consequence, your entire identity becomes rhetorical. She stops listening, not because your words lack meaning, but because your actions lack gravity. And no woman follows a man whose energy can be accessed without effort. You didn't lose her respect because you apologized. You lost it because you apologized twice. You lost it because your apology was followed by inaction, by compromise, by forgiveness offered before change was demanded. And every time you let her back into your space without resetting the standard, she learned that your love was real, but your frame was not. So understand this: apology is not a ritual. It is a rare signal of awareness followed by immediate structural shift. Without that, it's noise. And noise, no matter how honest, will never substitute for power, because power never explains itself twice. She didn't lose respect because you forgave her. She lost respect because nothing changed after. No structure, no pause, no recalibration of the hierarchy. You forgave her, then returned everything to normal. As if the betrayal never happened. As if the tone, the distance, the violation were simply an accident that could be erased by patience and goodwill. But in the real world, in power, in statecraft, in love, forgiveness without reform is not reconciliation, it's submission. And the one who submits, even in the name of virtue, becomes forgettable to the one they submit to. You thought you were being mature. You thought love meant moving forward. But Machiavelli warned against this softness. He wrote that when a prince shows mercy to those who break the law without making an example of them, he invites rebellion. Because the people see that authority has no edge. That crime leads to comfort, not consequence. And the same pattern lives in relationships. When your forgiveness doesn't lead to change, it becomes a license. Not to love you more, but to test you further. Look at what happened. You forgave her, but she didn't apologize with action. She apologized with words, maybe tears, maybe a gift, maybe a breakdown. But after a few days, the same energy returned, the same attitude, the same distance. Because your forgiveness didn't require anything of her. No effort, no admission of pattern, no re-entry protocol. She walked back in like a guest who had never broken your furniture, and you let her. You didn't make her rebuild the trust. You didn't withdraw your attention. You didn't reassert your position. You just opened the door and smiled. You made love the only requirement. And love, when stripped of consequence, is weightless. It cannot anchor anyone. It cannot demand orientation. It cannot hold a woman's respect. Because without the pain of re-earning what she broke, she feels no urgency to protect it. She doesn't reflect. She doesn't evolve. She adapts to the lowered standard, and adapts so well you start doubting whether you were ever right to be upset in the first place. But let me make this clear. If your forgiveness doesn't cost her anything, it will never mean anything. It becomes a forgettable gesture, a bypass, a weakness wrapped in emotional language. You called it strength. But she felt that it came from fear of losing her, fear of conflict, fear of being seen as difficult. And the feminine does not admire fear, not even fear wrapped in flowers. She admires law, and law must be enforced. You can forgive a woman, but only after space, only after change, only after her return is humble, not assumed. Only after she rebuilds her place in your frame, not walks back into it like nothing happened. Anything less than that isn't love, it's surrender, it's handing her the sword and pretending you're still king. So burn this into your mind. Forgiveness without a restructuring of power is not healing. It is erasure of masculine order. And when a woman senses that your law erases itself under pressure, she does not feel saved. She feels superior. She didn't test you because she hated you. She tested you because she needed to know whether your frame was theater or throne, whether your standards were structure or slogans, whether the first betrayal was a crack in your armor or a key to your compliance. That's why she pushed again. Not out of malice, but out of instinct. Because when a woman violates your boundary and you still hold her the same, still give her the same access, the same attention, the same softness, she does what Machiavelli says all opportunists do. She moves to see how far she can advance. And she did. Not by yelling, not by demanding, but by observing, watching what happened when she withheld affection, when she questioned your leadership, when she paused her admiration, when she flirted with delay, indifference, disrespect. All quiet violations, but each one was a referendum on your spine. And each time you let it pass, she didn't feel forgiven. She felt confirmed that your masculinity was flexible, that your laws had loopholes, that your desire for her was greater than your commitment to your own structure. The tests weren't always obvious. They were casual, covert, designed to be deniable. I didn't mean it like that. You're too sensitive. Don't make it a big deal. But that's the point. She wanted to see if you would notice. And when you did notice, she watched how you responded. If you folded, she tested again. If you over-explained, she tested harder. And if you apologized for being hurt, you failed. Because a man who apologizes for having standards is no longer a ruler. He's a subject of her emotional court. The test wasn't just about the past, it was about her future. She needed to know if she could trust your strength. Not your words, but your enforcement. Not your patience, but your pressure. Because whether she admits it or not, every woman wants to know, will this man protect me from himself and from me? And when the answer is no, when she can see that her tears override your law, that her distance makes you chase, that her moods reshape your policies, she recalculates. She may still sleep beside you, but her loyalty is gone, not physically, spiritually. And from that moment forward, every test becomes more aggressive, not because she wants to hurt you, but because she's trying to feel something again, something that only consequence can create. You thought you were keeping her by letting the first one slide. You thought you were showing maturity. What you really did was signal that you could be shaped, that your crown was decorative, that your leadership was negotiable. And when a woman learns she can negotiate your boundaries emotionally, she stops respecting you silently and starts behaving accordingly, She tested you after the first betrayal, not because she doubted your love, but because she doubted your law. And now you know why you kept losing ground. You told yourself it was loyalty. That staying through the arguments, the coldness, the betrayals, the distance, the second chances, that all of it was proof of your strength. You were being the bigger man. You were being devoted. You were being reliable. You looked in the mirror and said, this is what real men do. They don't give up. They don't walk away when things get hard. But what you didn't understand, what Machiavelli knew, is that loyalty without enforcement is not admired. It's consumed. You weren't being loyal. You were being tolerated. And in time, pitied. Not because your love was weak, but because your love had no edge. And love without edge doesn't earn awe. It earns authority. For her. Because when a woman sees that you'll stay no matter how she moves, how she speaks, how she tests, how she withdraws, she doesn't feel safe. She feels sovereign. She didn't look at your devotion and think, this man will die for me. She looked at it and thought, this man will fold for me. You stayed through moods, through contradictions, through apologies that came with no change. And every time you stayed, hoping that your presence would eventually inspire her best, you killed your value. Slowly. Because presence without requirement is emotional charity. And no one respects what is endlessly available. You said you were loyal. But loyalty isn't just staying. Loyalty is boundary. Loyalty is saying, because I love you, I won't let you corrupt this. Loyalty isn't staying through disrespect. It's protecting the relationship from the very things that poison it. And if she's the one bringing the poison and you just drink it quietly, you're not loyal to her. You're disloyal to yourself. She never called it loyalty. Not once. Not in her mind. She called it weakness. She called it fear. She called it softness she could no longer respond to. And when she talked to her friends, if you only knew, she didn't say, he's such a strong man for staying. She said, he's too nice. I just don't feel it anymore. Because the man who stays for love but offers no law, that man becomes background noise, a safety net, a fallback, a placeholder. And nothing kills attraction faster than a man who refuses to defend his throne. You stayed to prove you were loyal. But what you proved was that you would trade self-respect for emotional proximity. That your spine could be softened with silence. That your structure could be rewritten if the woman cried long enough. And once she learned that, she didn't need to leave right away. She just needed to stop admiring you. And she did. Every ruler must be loved and feared, but if he cannot be both, it is safer to be feared. That is what I wrote, and what most men still refuse to accept. You believed your love would be enough, that your consistency, your forgiveness, your presence would anchor her. But no woman stays anchored to a man who refuses to carry a sword. And I do not mean violence. I mean consequence. The sharp, cold knowledge that your boundaries are real, that your law will be enforced, that your affection is powerful because it can be withdrawn. But you had no sword. You ruled with empty hands. You forgave quickly, apologized first, explained always. You called this emotional maturity, but she didn't feel safety. She felt superiority. She saw a man who could be molded, a man who could be cornered into softness with the right tone. And when she misbehaved, when she crossed your line, and you did nothing but offer warmth and reconciliation, you gave her the answer she didn't want to receive but couldn't ignore. He's not dangerous. And a man who is not dangerous cannot protect. He cannot command. He cannot lead. He can love, yes, but his love comes with no cost and therefore with no consequence. And that is why her desire for you decayed. Slowly, quietly, without warning. Not because she wanted to leave, but because she no longer had to respect you to stay. Do you not see how she began to speak differently? How her tone shifted when you brought up your needs? How she rolled her eyes when you spoke of principles? How she interrupted you, corrected you, challenged your pace? These were not personality quirks. They were evidence. Evidence that the man before her had no edge, that the castle she entered had no gate, that the ruler she once admired had been replaced by a host. And a host is not feared. A host is used until the meal is over. Forgiveness, when it is not backed by penalty, is surrender. You taught her that your leadership was sentimental, that you governed from hope, not law. that your expectations were more about inspiration than enforcement, and she adapted. She stopped trying to impress you. She stopped performing. She tested how far the chaos could go, and it went far, because no sword was ever drawn. And now you wonder why she walks without looking back, why she moved on so easily, why she gives another man the respect you begged for. It is not because he is kinder, smarter, or more attractive. It is because he has a sword, not in his hand but in his silence, in his refusal to explain, in his ability to leave the table when his law is violated. You tried to love her without showing your edge. But women don't follow softness. They follow structure. And structure that does not punish collapse will eventually be torn down by the very woman it tried to shelter. She didn't lose respect for you because you were unloving. She lost it because you were defenseless. You were trained to be noble, to forgive without conditions, to overlook her moods, to understand her past, to carry her pain like it was your own. You were taught that love meant never raising your voice, never walking away, never letting her feel punished, no matter what she did. And so when she disrespected you, you responded with softness. When she withdrew her warmth, you gave more. When she crossed your lines, you redrew them further back. You thought this was strength. But she didn't see a hero. She saw a man who had no courtroom, no gavel, no standard of judgment that meant anything. She wanted to be loved, yes, but not like that. Not like a child is loved. Not like someone who could destroy and be welcomed back without examination. What she wanted, what her instincts craved, even if her lips never said it, was a man who would weigh her behavior, a man who would measure her, a man who would enforce. You thought that being understanding would make her feel safe. But she didn't need understanding, she needed accountability. The kind that says, you may be beautiful, but beauty doesn't rewrite law. You may be emotional, but emotion doesn't erase structure. She needed to feel that her actions had a boundary, that your presence had requirements, that your attention was not a right, but a privilege. And instead, you gave it endlessly, like a well with no bottom, like a kingdom with no guards. Machiavelli warned against this illusion, the idea that mercy, when extended too far, will inspire loyalty. It doesn't. It inspires entitlement. Because when wrong behavior brings no penalty, when rebellion brings no exile, the ruler becomes symbolic. And the governed lose fear, and with it, respect. And in your relationship, that's exactly what happened. You became a noble figure, a good man, a moral presence, but no longer a ruler. She wanted to feel judged, not to be condemned, but to be held. Because a man who can judge fairly is a man who can protect what matters. And when you refuse to judge, when you refuse to issue consequences, she stopped trusting you. Not because you weren't kind, but because you were blind. To the fact that her behavior was not an expression of pain. It was a test, one she needed you to pass, not with emotion but with law. You thought she'd love you more the less you made her feel uncomfortable. But she didn't want comfort. She wanted correction. She wanted to know that she couldn't get away with destroying what you were building, that your standards weren't just stories you told yourself. And when she realized they were, when she saw that she could wound you and still be kissed, she lost something she didn't even know was holding her in place, reverence. You were trained to be noble. But she didn't need nobility. She needed a judge. She didn't say it out loud. She may have even smiled. She may have cried. She may have thanked you. But deep down, when you forgave her too fast, she felt something shift. Not peace, not relief, not gratitude. What she felt, whether she could explain it or not, was dominance. Not over the relationship. Over you. And it changed the entire emotional terrain. Because when forgiveness comes faster than reflection, faster than consequence, faster than her own apology, you don't look loving, you look manageable. She knew what she did. She felt the shift in your tone, the disruption in the bond, the distance in your eyes, and she expected, even feared, a moment of reckoning. A pause, a rupture, a recalibration of your power, but instead what she saw was this. You folding your edge, you rushing to preserve comfort instead of asserting command, you forgiving her before she had to become worthy of it. And in that moment, something critical dissolved, not just her respect, but her attraction. You thought quick forgiveness would restore safety, that it would signal emotional maturity, that it would de-escalate the tension and prove that you weren't petty. But you didn't de-escalate. You devalued. Because value in any domain, political, financial, emotional, requires friction. It requires sacrifice. It requires evidence. And when she saw that she could re-enter your space without loss, without pressure, without explanation, she felt powerful. Not in the way that makes a woman feel safe, but in the way that makes her feel parent to your pliability. And when a woman feels more powerful than the man she's supposed to follow, she hardens. Not by choice, but by instinct. She begins to assert where she used to yield. She begins to question what she used to trust. She begins to carry the weight you dropped, your backbone, your standards, your spine. And then she resents it. Not because she wants you to be cruel, but because she needs you to cost something. Forgiveness, when it's too fast, robs her of that clarity. It tells her, you can break this man's rules and still be adored. You can violate his values and still be held. You can shatter his respect and still be invited to dinner. And once that belief forms, the dynamic cannot be reversed by words. It can only be reversed by consequence. And most men don't have the strength to issue it. So they over-express, over-apologize, over-accommodate, hoping to earn back the respect they gave away too soon. But once respect is lost, emotion alone cannot retrieve it. You forgave her before she earned it, and that made her feel something you never wanted her to feel, that your law could be broken, and you'd still kiss the hand that broke it. She didn't change overnight. She didn't wake up one day colder, harder, sharper. What changed was the rhythm. Subtle shifts, less softness in her tone, more interruptions when you spoke. Quieter admiration, a delayed response to your leadership, a new resistance to your pace. And you told yourself she was just going through something, that maybe she was tired, stressed, distracted. But what you didn't see, what you refused to admit, was that her mask had slipped, not because she was evil, but because she no longer needed to wear it. When you offered mercy without consequence, without distance, without demand, you ended the test. You revealed your edge was decorative. And the moment she learned she could violate your law and return to full access without cost, the theater ended. Because her performance was built on belief, and belief dies in the absence of discipline. She saw that you wouldn't leave, that you wouldn't assert, that your throne was symbolic, and so she began behaving accordingly. Machiavelli wrote that a prince must maintain the appearance of virtue while retaining the power to act with cruelty when necessary. Not for sport, but for survival. But you lacked that balance. You offered forgiveness, not as a political maneuver, but as a plea. And once she sensed that your mercy came from fear, fear of abandonment, fear of conflict, fear of losing her, she adjusted. Not emotionally, strategically. She stopped editing herself. She stopped praising you. She began speaking over your authority, and when you corrected her, she responded not with remorse, but with challenge. Because she knew deep down that your corrections came too late, that they were now acts of desperation, not expressions of control. You had let her see the machinery behind the crown, and it wasn't made of steel. It was made of longing, of hope, of the fantasy that love would be enough to maintain order, but love is not enough, not in statecraft, not in relationships. What maintains order is hierarchy, enforcement, the presence of risk. And when she saw that your love came without those things, her mask fell, not out of cruelty, but out of necessity. Because a woman will only pretend to revere what she truly fears. When the fear dies, the performance dies with it. You kept trying to get back the woman you first met, but the woman you met was never permanent. She was provisional, the version of herself she gave to the man she thought could not be controlled. But when she saw that you could be controlled, through tears, through silence, through withdrawal, she no longer needed to give you her best, because you'd already shown that her worst still earned your devotion. So don't ask where her softness went. It left the moment your forgiveness became predictable. You told yourself she betrayed you, that she changed, that she switched on you without warning. But betrayal doesn't arrive in chaos. It arrives in response. It arrives when a woman has studied the laws you silently enforce. Not the ones you speak of, but the ones you live by. And if your laws said, I will stay no matter how I'm treated, She did not betray you. She followed your doctrine. Because women don't obey your ideals. They obey your enforcement. You told her what you expected, respect, honesty, loyalty, but what you enforced was tolerance. So that's what she learned. She didn't have to read your mind. She just had to watch your spine. And your spine said, he won't leave. He'll come back. He'll explain again. He'll forgive again. And so she began to move differently. Not because she hated you, but because you trained her to. You handed her the rule book, and when she followed it, you called her disloyal. But disloyalty cannot exist without first being punished. If it isn't punished, it isn't disloyalty, it's custom. And what she did under the shield of custom. You gave her full access to your energy, your time, your name, even after she withdrew hers. You allowed her to speak in tones that would never be acceptable from your enemies, but you rationalized them from your lover. You let her wander emotionally, collapse boundaries, rewrite your routines, and you said nothing. Or worse, you forgave. So what did she do? She continued. She didn't wake up one day and decide to test your masculinity. She discovered one action at a time that your masculinity could be reshaped by emotion, that your policies could be revised with pressure, that your leadership could be softened through sentiment. And that was the moment the relationship began to rot, not because she wanted it to fail, but because she realized the throne was vacant. Machiavelli taught that power not enforced is not neutral. It is interpreted as weakness. The absence of consequence doesn't preserve love, it breeds contempt. So she gave you the truth, the real her, not the mask, the real behaviors, the real moods, the real dominance. Because she no longer needed to be chosen, she was certain you wouldn't leave. So when you call it betrayal, remember, she followed the laws you allowed. She spoke the language your tolerance trained her to speak. She disrespected you not as an act of defiance, but as a ritual. One you reinforced every time you smiled through discomfort, every time you took her back without consequence, every time you traded clarity for emotional comfort. She didn't betray you. She obeyed you, and now you live in the world you built, with the rules you refused to enforce. You think you forgave her. But what you really did was retreat. You confused avoidance with peace. You gave her another chance not because she earned it, but because you couldn't stomach the silence. And that's not forgiveness. That's fear. Forgiveness, real, sovereign, strategic forgiveness, requires distance and discipline. It is not given in the heat of pain. It is not granted while your boundaries are still bleeding. It is only offered after order has been restored and the violator has felt the loss. Forgiveness without distance is cheap. It costs her nothing. And if it costs her nothing, she will never treat it as rare. She'll treat it as ritual. Something you do to avoid discomfort. Something she can expect. And when forgiveness becomes expected, it no longer signals grace, it signals submission. Machiavelli would never have advised a prince to forgive without exile, without punishment, without a cold, calculated demonstration of what betrayal costs. Because if betrayal leads back to comfort, if the transgressor returns to your court untouched, unshaken, unreformed, then you have not forgiven with strength. You have surrendered with a smile. Forgiveness without discipline is worse than vengeance, because it doesn't even teach. It doesn't show teeth. It offers warmth before structure, emotion before correction. And a woman, whether she says it or not, will lose all trust in a man who lets her violate his laws and walk back into his arms without recalibrating the power. Because she needs to know, will he defend his kingdom even from me? You thought forgiveness meant restoring intimacy. But what she needed was to feel your absence, to feel the door close behind her, to feel the weight of what she broke. That absence is the first half of forgiveness, not to punish but to reset, to make her ask, not assume, whether she is still welcome in your space, and that answer should never come quickly. Because a fast answer is a cheap answer, and cheap answers destroy kingdoms. Discipline is what makes forgiveness feel real. When you show that your silence has weight. When you show that your love is high value, not because it's unconditional, but because it has requirements. Forgiveness must be conditional, not on perfection, but on reflection, on humility, on behavioral shift. Without those things, your mercy means nothing, and she knows it. You cannot forgive a woman who has not yet seen herself clearly. You cannot let her back in while she's still narrating your pain as her confusion. You cannot hold her and call it strength if she hasn't earned the right to be held again. Your arms are not therapy. Your presence is not a rehabilitation center. You are a kingdom. And your gates do not swing open on sympathy. So if you forgive, do it like a ruler, with silence, with removal, with time, with clear law. And if she returns, let her meet a man who no longer explains, only enforces. That is real forgiveness. Forgiveness that restores respect, not just comfort. Forgiveness that is slow, rare, and final. The kind of forgiveness that commands alignment, not applause. There is a law of leadership that no soft heart survives, and Machiavelli made it clear. He who once pardons an offense must never pardon it again. The first time it is mercy. The second time it is weakness. The third time it is suicide. You think you were being loving. You think you were giving her space to grow. You think forgiveness was the noble path. But let me ask you, what changed? What did she learn? What did your mercy teach her if not this? The rules can be broken, and broken again, and he'll still stay. You didn't just forgive her once. You forgave her for the same thing twice, and in doing so, you killed the weight of your own words. A man who does not enforce his law the second time proves that the first was performative. It signals that your emotional reaction was momentary, not principled. That your standards were just expressions of hurt, not boundaries to be honored. And once she sees that your discipline is a costume, that it comes off when she cries or when she flirts with distance, she doesn't feel loved. She feels disgusted. The second betrayal wasn't worse because of what she did. It was worse because of what you didn't do. You didn't walk. You didn't withdraw. You didn't make her feel the chill of a man whose kingdom had been violated twice. Instead, you soothed her. You softened again. You tried to make sense of it. And you thought, maybe if I'm just more understanding this time, she'll respect me more. But Machiavelli would laugh. Because understanding doesn't build respect, consequence does. She didn't lose respect because you were too harsh. She lost respect because you didn't mean it the first time. Or if you did, you didn't back it with action. And that's the fatal sin of modern men. They declare boundaries like lines in sand and then beg to redraw them when they're crossed. And women who are biologically wired to test strength don't hate this. They resent it because it forces them to lead. And a woman who must lead a man she does not fear will never stay soft. Machiavelli ruled that a ruler must be decisive in punishment. Not drawn out, not dramatic, but sudden, clear, and final. One strike, one silence, one exile, and then order resumes. You did the opposite. You forgave. Then you forgave again. And by the time she tested you the third time, she wasn't wondering if you'd forgive her. She was wondering how little effort she'd need to offer to get back in. Never reward the same crime twice. Never reset the board for someone who knows where to place their knife. The woman who sins once and repents with humility, with effort, with change, she may be worth a second look. But the woman who sins again in the same pattern, with the same tone, with the same defiance, she's not betraying you. She's counting on you. And if you give her that third chance, just know you're not being loving. You're being removed from her respect, from your own throne. She didn't leave because you were too strict. She left because you were too available, too agreeable, too eager to please. She didn't want a man who nodded every time she cried, apologized every time she raised her voice, folded every time the tension rose. She wanted a man who could say no, and not just say it, but mean it. Enforce it, hold the line, walk away if needed. With silence, with finality. Not to manipulate her, but to show her, my love is deep, but my laws are deeper. You thought saying yes would make her feel secure, that if you gave her everything she wanted whenever she wanted it, she'd love you more. But love doesn't live in indulgence. It lives in resistance, in knowing that the man beside you cannot be moved by tantrums, seduced by mood swings, or rewritten by emotion. Because that man can lead. That man can be trusted. That man has authority not just over her, but over himself. Machiavelli understood this. A ruler who cannot say no, who cannot resist the temptations of the people, the cries of the court, the pleas of his own advisors, is not a ruler. He is a puppet. And the people do not love a puppet. They exploit him. They tolerate him. They wait for him to fall. And the same is true in relationships. The woman who cannot feel your refusal cannot trust your leadership. She might smile. She might stay. But inside, she's drifting. You gave her your time, your heart, your forgiveness, your explanations, but you never gave her your number. You never said, "This far, no further." You never said, "That tone won't be tolerated again." You never said, "If this happens once more, I'm gone." And if you said it, you didn't act on it. So she learned. She learned that your boundaries were theater, that your silence was stalling, that your strength was for display, not defense. And she adjusted. She began to lead. She began to correct. She began to fill the vacuum you left behind, because a man who cannot say no leaves space. And nature abhors a vacuum. She didn't want the crown, but she took it, not out of greed, out of survival, because someone had to hold the line. And since you wouldn't, she did. And the moment she did, you became the follower. This is why she lost respect, not because you were cruel, but because you were always available, always forgiving, always folding. And a woman cannot desire a man she outranks emotionally. She can pity him, she can support him, but she cannot submit to him. And without that submission, not to you as a tyrant, but to you as a standard, her love transforms into labor, into resentment, into distance. You thought love meant being her yes. But she was waiting for a man strong enough to tell her no. And now you know why she left. She doesn't remember your kindness. She doesn't recall your patience. She doesn't carry your apologies in her heart. She forgot you, not because you were cruel, but because you made yourself forgettable. You thought love meant never leaving, never raising your voice, never letting the storm hit. But storms are what make structures real. And because you forgave her, without force, without distance, without discipline, she never felt your gravity. She only felt your softness. And softness without edge is not intimacy. It's background noise. You were the one who stayed, who held her through her coldness, who reasoned through her disrespect, who forgave again and again in the hope that love would return. But she didn't see love. She saw availability, predictability, safety. Not the safety of a protector, but the safety of an emotional doormat. A man who would fold before he would enforce. A man who believed love was earned through exposure, not boundaries. And in time, the love you gave turned into her indifference. Because what costs nothing is valued as such. She stopped checking in. She stopped respecting your time. She stopped feeling nervous to disappoint you. And when that happened, the energy died. The admiration died. The desire died. Because desire cannot survive in a space where power is not present. You forgave her because you loved her. But she forgot you because you forgave too easily. And the man who is forgiven once may still be respected. But the man who is always forgiving becomes decoration, a soft space, a sentimental blur in a memory she doesn't revisit. Because you didn't mark her, you didn't shake her, you didn't make her feel what most women secretly crave. This man cannot be moved by my weakness. This man holds his throne even when I am falling apart. This man, if I lose him, will not come back, and I will feel it forever. But you didn't make her feel that. You made her feel safe to fail. Safe to disrespect, safe to test, and then safe to leave, not in a blaze of betrayal, but in the quiet indifference of a woman who stopped seeing you as the center of gravity, and started seeing you as a couch she no longer wanted to sit on. So let this be your final clarity. Forgiveness is not a virtue unless it's guarded by consequence. Mercy without edge is not noble. It's suicidal. You don't keep a woman through love. You keep her through law, through structure, through power, and you forgave. She forgot. Next time, don't forgive so fast and make her remember. If you now understand what your forgiveness cost you, comment, "I forgave too soon, and it cost me everything." And subscribe, not for hope, but for structure. Not to be seen, but to be sharpened. This isn't love advice, and it's political warfare for the heart. Machiavelli warned you. Now you move differently.